The United States is increasing its use of Predator drones in both Afghanistan and Pakistan, but a UN official recently came out and said this could be violating international law. So, is the United States going to stop with these drone attacks or continue using the same tactics? Well, joining me to discuss, David Axe. He's a military correspondent, also contributor to the blog War is Boring. He's speaking to me from Afghanistan right now. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Now, you're in Afghanistan right now, pretty much an eyewitness. Talk about what you're seeing, what you're hearing. What is the situation there right now?
Well, it depends on which province and which district you're in, but in provinces that the U.S. Army and NATO allies are moving into after reinforcements have flowed in, especially from the United States, there's an increased level of violence in provinces that have long had ISAF, that is NATO troops. The security is a little bit better, and there's some development work even going on in those areas.
Right, now let's talk about the November 7th election. What are people doing in the country to ensure fairness, and is this even possible? Is the country going to see a fair election unlike what happened before?
I don't think anyone expects a perfectly fraud-free election. I think the second time around will be better than the first. I know that NATO is going to be playing a bigger role in the selection of the polling places so that you don't have as many polling places in remote, unsecure areas where it's impossible for anyone really to monitor those. It was those polling places that were too far afield for NATO forces or for UN monitors that had the worst fraud problems on the first go-around. So this time, I think with fewer polling places, better security around the polls, and better monitoring, there'll be less fraud, but nobody thinks it'll be a perfect election.
Now, it's interesting. I was just reading your blog, and on your blog it says Washington has conflated counterterrorism with nation building. You know, all the experts who I speak to, whether they be Republicans, Democrats, say this is the biggest mistake. This is the most dangerous thing you can do. You cannot possibly think realistically that the United States could set up a democracy in Kabul. Is that what's going on there? Are troops down there nation building essentially?
In some provinces, they're doing a lot of development work. I think increasingly we're seeing NATO and the U.S. temper their strategic appetites in the sense of what they want to achieve in Afghanistan. So we're very far from a kind of small footprint counter-terrorism strategy that would have the U.S. and NATO focus solely on killing al-Qaeda agents they could identify in Afghanistan. We're far from that. There are still large numbers of U.S. troops and NATO troops on the ground, and in the areas where they're able to provide security, they are trying to build some sort of functional Afghan society that's closer to looking like a Western democracy than traditional Afghan society. But the scale of that, I don't think anyone believes anymore that it's going to be nationwide. I think that the West and its allies are giving up on crafting a Western-style democracy in Kabul. I think you'll see more and more effort focused on grassroots development at the district level, but only in those districts that the military can afford to secure.
Now, I want to talk to you about these drone strikes. This is actually a strategy that Joe Biden advocated instead of sending thousands more troops, perhaps just focusing on using these Predator drones. But now we hear this UN official saying, look, this is violating international law. So what's next? Is the United States going to continue doing this?
Drone strikes have been very successful. For all of the legal murkiness, drones have worked to decapitate insurgent and terrorist cells where these cells can be positively identified. The problem is that there's probably been a fair number of civilians killed inadvertently in these attacks, either because of poor targeting or that is to say that we didn't know exactly who we were shooting at, or just because it's a crowded battlefield and the insurgents and terrorists mix with the civilian populace. So airstrikes always come with the risk of civilian casualties, even when they're very effective. And General McChrystal himself, the top officer for the NATO operation, said that air power contains, and I think his quote was, the seed of our own destruction. If you push air power too far, you alienate and you kill too many civilians, you alienate the very population you're trying to protect in a counterinsurgency campaign. The United States is not going to stop using drones. They are so deeply integrated into counterinsurgency and counterterrorism strategy, they're not going to go away. But in recent months, we have seen a de-emphasis on air power, the use of air power in general, because of the risk of civilian casualties. The UN has a very good point, but you're not going to see the U.S. military completely turn around on drone use. They're too good when they work.
Well, the other issue that we have to consider is that the CIA and the Defense Department are usually silent when it comes to when and how about these drones. So the last question is, where's the accountability here?
It depends on where you are. In Afghanistan, the accountability is possible. You have most drones being used in Afghanistan proper are owned by the military. And the military has rules of engagement and targeting procedures that it's fairly open about. That is to say, basically, the military requires firm corroboration on the identity of a target before they launch a missile. Now, CIA-operated drones, especially those operating in Pakistan, operate under a great deal more secrecy. So it's much harder to have some third party follow up behind an airstrike and figure out who exactly was killed, were any civilians killed, and what are the effects of this. In Afghanistan, you can be accountable. In Pakistan, not so much.
David Axe saying that the United States will not stop using these drones. I want to thank you for speaking with us today, and be safe over there in Afghanistan.